Everyone. My name is Alice Brown, and I'm the General Secretary here at the Royal Society of Edinburgh. The Royal Society of Edinburgh, I hope you all know, is Scotland's National Academy, and we're delighted to welcome you today, but also to be hosting this event in conjunction with the Scottish Resource Centre for Women in SET. So very much welcome you. Before we start the event, can I just go through the usual housekeeping things? First of all, fire alarm. We're not expecting a fire alarm today, so if the alarm does go off, I expect you all to leave in a quiet and orderly fashion by the back door. And where we assemble is outside the George Hotel, taking care not to be knocked down in the street, crossing the George Street, but outside the George Hotel is where we'll assemble should there be a problem, but we hope there will not be such a problem. Can I also remind you to switch off your mobile phones before we start? And, sorry? Or put them on silent, yes, so people can tweet. I think Fiona's going to explain the tweeting arrangements later. And just to let you know that we will be recording the event so that we can write up a report to put on our website, okay? Can I first of all give apologies too from the chair of the Tapping All Our Talents report, Professor Dame Jocelyn Bell-Burnell. It's a real pity that Jocelyn can't be with us today, but Jocelyn will be joining us by video link. We've recorded her just explaining some of the things that have been happening south of the border. So very, very briefly from me then, just by way of background, it's worth reminding everyone that this study was initiated by the Royal Society of Edinburgh in conjunction with the Chief Scientific Advisor for Scotland. And we brought our minds together and created a working group. Why did we do this? Why? Because we were concerned about the high attrition rate of women in science, technology, engineering and maths, with 73% talented and well-qualified women leaving the sector. But also we're concerned that those that did remain in the sector were underrepresented in senior positions, both in business, industry, universities, and so on. Now, we argue in our report that this is not only a loss for the women concerned, but it's a huge loss for Scotland in terms of the Scottish economy and Scottish society, losing such talented women. And we made recommendations, therefore, to do something about this. But the key aspect of the recommendation was that we should have coordinated, collaborative, cooperative action. In other words, this is not just an issue for government to address, it's an issue for all the different players, all the different partners, employers, universities, societies like this, to do something about it. So in our report, we set out very much what we hoped people would do. We launched our report in April 2012, and since then, we've had a huge range of dissemination, and what struck me is the level of interest in what we've been doing. So since we've launched, we'll be disseminating by going through a cross-party group in science and technology in the Scottish Parliament, a Scottish Resource Centre briefing at Edinburgh Napier University, and 3 events in Glasgow, Aberdeen, Dundee, and Edinburgh, 4 events, all looking at the report and getting feedback on the report. Since then, there's been 2 debates in the Scottish Parliament for which we've provided briefings. We've had meetings with the Scottish Funding Council, the Equality Challenge Unit, and some of the issues, but also we've given evidence to a House of Commons Select Committee, Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. Jocelyn will say more about that. We've given a presentation to an EU conference on gender in November 2012, and since then, presentations this year at Queen's University Belfast, Stormont in Belfast, Scotland Europa, the Deans of Science and Engineering in Scotland and St Andrews, Scottish Water and Standard Life. So I think I can fairly say there's been no shortage of interest in the report, and what's really encouraging is that it's been very positively received and that people are keen that we shouldn't be sitting here in another 10 years' time saying that the position is the same, that actually we can actually see a difference will take place as a result. So the objective of today's event is very much to take stock and to hear from the different people who are going to give short presentations and hear about progress that has been taken in these different areas, but also for all of us, you, the audience too, to identify what the next step should be. I'm delighted to say that we're going to have the event chaired by Professor Fiona Mackay from the University of Edinburgh, But before I hand over to Fiona, can we just hear from Jocelyn, her perspective on what's happened so far? Jocelyn.
Good morning and greetings from down south. My apologies that I can't be with you, but I have a long-standing commitment here which prevents me travelling. I thought you might be interested in knowing of some of the ripples that the Royal Society of Edinburgh report had caused down here, or at least the ones that I'm aware of. The Government Department for Business, Innovations and Skills, BIS, has taken an interest in the report, as has its chief scientist, Professor John Perkins. I've had conversations with him and I've been in to speak to BIS itself. The House of Commons has a select committee that covers the area of BIS, and they initiated an inquiry on women in the workplace. I suspect this was initiated by Anne McEachin, the MP for Glasgow North, who's a member of that committee. As chair of the Royal Society of Edinburgh inquiry, I was invited to give evidence before this committee. It's a good deal more scary than going into the Scottish Parliament, I can tell you. That inquiry has now finished taking oral evidence, but there isn't a report out yet. And the research councils, collectively, UKRC, have noted our recommendations, particularly the recommendation that they should only award funds to departments that have demonstrated that they're women-friendly. The research councils have thought quite hard and long about this and come up with their own statement of expectations for equality and diversity. It's a bit tamer than our report would have wished, in that it doesn't require departments to show that they're women-friendly and friendly to minorities. But it does encourage them to demonstrate that they are, and it reserves the right to attach funding to adequate demonstration of those qualities. They also incidentally formally welcomed our report, which was good. What else has changed in the last 12 months since the report was issued? As you may recall, in the Queen's speech, there was talk about more paternity leave. Again, this doesn't go as far as I think we would want, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And interestingly, judging by the reaction of some people to this suggestion, there's clearly quite a bit of learning needed yet. The other thing that's happening is that Athena Swan is inundated with applications from universities and departments wanting accreditation. I hope it is not going to sink under its own success. And I hope also that those bodies who use Athena Swan for accreditation, either funding bodies or the universities and departments, will feel able to help fund it and staff it, because otherwise it will sink under its own success. The mainstreaming of gender issues continues, and okay, it's early days yet, but I am concerned that this mainstreaming, so-called, is actually, at least in the short term, resulting in less effort on gender issues and a lower profile for gender issues. I hope the mainstreaming really does work as mainstreaming. There's also more emphasis on wider diversity issues, not just gender issues. That's absolutely right, but women are the largest minority and arguably the lowest represented. So again, I hope that emphasis on wider diversity issues doesn't mean a diminution in effort on gender issues. So I'm sorry I can't be with you. I hope you have a successful seminar. I look forward to hearing how it went. I hope you've found this rather soppy southern perspective useful. Thank you to all of you for your interest and your attendance, and thank you especially to the speakers and the leaders for your time and your effort. Have a good day.
Well, thank you to Jocelyn in her absence, and we've certainly given her an update on what happens today. I'm now going to hand over to Fiona, but first of all, can I also extend my thanks to the speakers for agreeing to speak today, and to the Minister, Shona Robinson, who I know has to leave after she's given her presentation, but will be following up on what's happened today. So, Fiona, over to you to take over from now.
Thanks very much indeed. One little thing before we start. For those of you who tweet, the name and password for the RSE Wi-Fi is up there with some, not very imaginative, but some hashtags. So I'll leave that up there for a moment for people to make a note, and it would be good to get some tweets out there about the seminar. So I'm delighted to be here. Now, the shape of the rest of the morning is that we have a series of speakers, starting off with the Minister, Shona Robinson. They'll each make a short, 10 minutes maximum presentation. And then when we get to the end of all those short presentations, we'll then have opportunity for question and answer. And people have been asked to speak about, they're asked to reflect upon the progress that's been made on these issues since the report was published last year, and also to think about what might be the challenges that remain and the steps to be taken next. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome Shona Robinson, who is Minister for Commonwealth Games and Sport in the Scottish Government, but also has responsibility for the Equalities portfolio. And thank you very much indeed, Shona.
Well, good morning, everyone. I like Jocelyn's style. She's got a good sense of humour. And thanks to the Royal Society of Edinburgh for inviting me here today. Thanks to you, Professor Mackay, for the introduction. I Googled the book, Gender, Politics and Institutions. I have it on my reading list, but the reviews are very positive, which has put it up my reading list, actually. And I look forward to getting into that in some detail. But there can be little doubt that the issues it discusses are very pertinent to today's very important discussion. I'm also intrigued to hear the results of the constitutional seminars that you're organising, and I certainly agree that gender equality absolutely does matter in our new Scotland. And I think that's why the achievements of another panel member in addressing gender equality in STEM, Professor Yellowlees, must be recognised. She was head of the chemistry department at Edinburgh when it achieved the Athena Swan Silver Award, and the department has since gone on to achieve the Athena Swan Gold Award in 2012. And it was only the second department in the UK to achieve that level, and as such is setting a standard in Scotland that is certainly a high standard, and of course in the UK as a whole. I'm sure Mac Batho will tell you more about this in a few moments, but all the higher education institutions offering STEM in Scotland are now committed to achieving the Athena Swan Bronze Award within 2 years. Although I note what Jocelyn was saying about the workload that requires, maybe that's some food for thought for later discussion. Professor Bell Burnell has eloquently described why we are here and what the issues are. When our First Minister announced funding for the Scottish Resource Centre for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology last year, he was doing so because he recognised and we recognised the importance of encouraging women to work in the very fields our economy will increasingly be reliant upon. The RSE's report has given us additional direction, and it focused on postgraduate employment of women in STEM and analysed the factors that cause the loss of talent seen within the sector. And of course, as we heard earlier, that's a loss to the economy and to Scotland. Some of these factors involve the unique culture within STEM organisations and academia, but others are common across all fields and at all grades. I want to describe to you what progress we've made so far. When Nicola Sturgeon, the Deputy First Minister, welcomed the report, she committed us to work with key partners to find solutions. So with the help of the STUC, we held Scotland's first summit for women's employment at our dynamic Earth in September. Attendance was very good, not just in quantity, but more importantly, in many respects, in quality. The day was divided into a number of sessions, including one on the issue of occupational segregation. And the issues discussed were obviously very relevant to the STEM sector. And despite the much wider sector representation, many similar themes and recommendations to the RSE's report emerged during the two summit sessions, such as better use of procurement, issues with data, and the use of role models. So what have we done about it? Well, we had already committed to introducing specific duties under the public sector equality duty. These came into effect in May of last year. These include a duty to report on horizontal and vertical occupational segregation within public organisations. And the Scottish Government's own statistics on this are due at the end of this month, and we'll ensure these are published. Whenever possible and practical, statistics are made publicly available, and it's worth pointing out, though, that in some areas gender disaggregation statistics are self-declared and are provided on a voluntary basis, so we have to bear that in mind. And that's particularly the case with small businesses, which often don't have the resource to supply data. However, the number of recorded female business startups has risen from 1,895 in 2007-8 to 3,998 in 2011-12. And the percentage of business startup records with gender details has also risen from 54% to 60% during the same period. The Scottish Government has recently purchased a boost to the Small Business Survey for 2012. This boost ensured that 1,000 businesses were sampled in this survey in Scotland, allowing for a more robust analysis of the data. Our analysts have just received the final data from this survey and will be looking to publish a report on the data in the spring of this year. On procurement, we're working with the Equality and Human Rights Commission on guidance for buyers to maximise the impact of the existing legislation. And in childcare, we've taken a number of initiatives, 18 million to create high-quality, coordinated and accessible family support, informed by our engagement with parents in the parenting strategy. This includes £3 million per annum to local authorities to develop community information and support strategies, set up and provide additional support to access to those services for parents that most need it, and £9 million to support wider implementation of family support based on evidence-based approaches that will support change and deliver real tangible benefits, steered by the Early Years Task Force. And we're also continuing to invest in the highly successful Play, Talk, Read campaign. This is the only campaign of its kind in the UK to promote positive parent-child interaction from the start. And of course, on top of that, we have the innovative Early Years Collaborative to help drive improvement in early years. Also, as you'll know, the First Minister recently announced that he has asked the Council of Economic Advisers to take forward an analysis of the social and economic benefits of a high-quality universal early learning and childcare system for children, parents, women, families and society as a whole. And this analysis will draw on the best available international evidence to inform the position of Scotland, to look at different models of provision and funding, and to produce an analysis to consider how we could shift to levels of support that are commonplace in other European countries. Now, I've already mentioned our funding of the Scottish Resource Centre, but we also committed to continue to close the Gap initiative, as well as announcing new funding of £250,000 for CareerWise, which will encourage more girls to consider careers in science and engineering. There is a long way to go, however, and one of the main recommendations from the report was for a national strategy aimed at addressing occupational segregation. And we're taking this forward with two separate linked groups. The Scottish Government's Occupational Segregation Cross-Directorate Working Group, a bit of a mouthful, I'm sure we'll find a shorter version, but that's been reconvened and it had its first meeting earlier this month. And this is a group from across government portfolios to reflect the relevance of these issues to all areas, from education to industry, from justice to health. There are also some key representatives from Close the Gap, the Scottish Resource Centre, Men in Childcare and the STUC. And the main purpose of reconvening this group is to consider the potential action which might additionally be taken to address the recommendations relating to occupational segregation made at the Women's Employment Summit and those from tapping all our talents. The working group will report to the Strategic Group for Women in Work, and this is chaired by Angela Constance, the Minister for Youth Employment, which will provide progress reports to Parliament. It has independent membership from across academia and business and includes members from the private, public and third sectors. Both Anne Henderson from the STUC on the panel today and the RSE's General Secretary, Professor Alice Brown, are members. As well as providing the strategic oversight and scrutiny needed to drive this work forward, it will also advise on actions to further address the challenges raised, monitor implementation of the agreed plans, reviewing progress and challenging inaction. These two groups together will ensure that actions continue to be taken and that progress towards delivering both sets of recommendations is monitored. I'm sorry I'm not staying to hear the other panel members speak and take part in discussions. I've got another engagement I have to be at. But I have asked for a report back on the key points made, and I look forward to hearing those. The Scottish Government does take equality very seriously. But I have to say, as a Minister for Equality, I also take this seriously, but also very personally. And with my newfound responsibilities for equality, I really want to push the boundaries and push the boat out to see what else we can collectively do. Equality cuts across all portfolios within government. That's why there's so many of my colleagues involved, from the First Minister through many of the Cabinet Secretaries and Ministers. And I think as a government we are very clear of our aspirations for Scotland. We want to achieve equality for all in all aspects of people's lives, including in their learning and career choices. And it's not just that that's the right thing to do. I think it's the most compelling argument is that if we don't, we miss so much. We miss so many talents, so many opportunities, so much potential. For me, it's as much an economic argument as it is about equality and the right thing to do. We need to harness the abilities of all of our people, and clearly at the moment, as the evidence tells us, we're not doing that. So, as the Minister for Equality, and I think I formally took on this last week, and I've already had a plethora of meetings with the key officials within government, but almost more important for me is to start to have an ongoing dialogue with yourselves and those who stand together in Scotland, who see what the problem is, but also see the potential for us to drive change. I think uniquely in Scotland, we're much more able to do that with our population size, our institutions being quite close to us, not just the Parliament, but our other institutions. So we can, I think, drive change, perhaps in a way that's maybe more difficult elsewhere. So what I can say is I pledge you my personal commitment to do so. I look forward to working with you. I look forward to hearing what comes back from today, and perhaps we can follow that up with a more detailed sit-down to begin to address some of the challenges. So, thank you for listening, and look forward to following up and talking with you some more. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to thank the Minister very much indeed for taking the time, which I think in itself demonstrates your commitment to the agenda. And I think we welcome having a champion with such passion and commitments. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Okay, moving on now, I'd like to next welcome Dr. Elaine Murray, who's a member of the Scottish Parliament. She's a scientist by training, and she's currently also convener of the cross-party parliamentary group on science and technology. So, Elaine, thank you very much.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm a bit shorter than Shona, so I'll put this down a wee bit. I'm the convener of the cross-party group on science and technology. I feel a wee bit as if I'm here a little bit under false pretences, because it's actually rather a long time ago that I did science. I did train as a scientist. I did both my first degree and my PhD in science, and I worked in a number of academic institutions for a while. But like 52% of women trained in STEM, I packed it in. And the reason I packed it in was I was pregnant with my second child, all sorts of issues around childcare and that sort of thing, and I couldn't face them with 2 children. I mean, I worked, I have to say, at that point in the Institute of Food Research in Reading, and my husband worked at GlaxoSmithKline in the west of London. We lived in Slough, which meant that I had this wee baby, my wee son, and we only got 3 months maternity leave in those days. It was statutory maternity leave. And for a year and a bit, he was rushed out the house at about 7:30 in the morning, because you had to get out to get on the motorway by then, or you didn't get out at all. So, and he'd taken to his childminder, and then he wasn't back again until 6:30. And unfortunately, my son also was as a child, was not one of these children who travelled terribly well. He's been unwell on a whole variety of public transport. And quite often he ended up, he would arrive at the childminders covered in sick. So it shouldn't really help anything. So, and then we always had all the other problems when, if he wasn't well, or if the childminder wasn't well, she actually had 5 children of her own, and she looked after another 2. So, had all those issues around, if somebody wasn't well and he couldn't come in. And when he was still in the little car seat, I could prop him at the end of the bench while he could look at me working with my Langmuir trough and working with the computer and so on. So he used to sit there. But unfortunately, he was very mobile early on. So not soon, for fairly early on, he began to walk and crawl around the lab and discovered there was such thing as there was a drain that you could pick up. And I remember turning around once and seeing this little child sort of picking the drain out and sticking his head down the drain to see what was down there. And I have to say, that's actually, well, there's 2 things. One, I was very politically active anyway, and I went on to become a politician. But that, just to face the idea of doing that with 2 babies, just seemed too much. And I packed in my career as a scientist. I mean, I did work in teaching and so on after that, but actually my career in research. And my daughter, whom I was pregnant with at that time, is now 25, so it's 25 years. And I think, looking at when Professor Bell Burnell came in, and I'm very pleased that she didn't find the cross-party group scary. I'm glad about that. We were terribly impressed with her and quite sort of starstruck with her. When we looked at the report that she chaired, or the group she chaired, the depressing thing for me was to see that so little had changed in 25 years. That the young women now training in STEM were actually meeting exactly the same problems. Okay, you get a bit longer off on maternity leave now. The fathers are now beginning to get paternity leave. But actually, fundamentally, a lot of women are still meeting the same barriers as I met and leaving. So as far as the cross-party group's concerned, I think that wasn't the first meeting we've had in STEM. We actually had a meeting, cross-party group meeting earlier with Linda Somerville, telling us about the work of the institute she works for. So we do actually have a long-standing interest in STEM, and I think it is something we will return to at future meetings, and I would certainly be interested to invite the Minister along in sometime in the future, just to discuss with her how progress is being made, and others. We also, of course, have an Equal Opportunities Committee in the Scottish Parliament, and that is chaired by a friend of mine, Mary Fee, who I'll maybe suggest to her that at some point, if they have time on their agenda, they might want to have a look at some of these issues from the Equal Opportunities point of view, because it is, of course, an equalities issue. It is an equalities issue which specifically affects women and takes women out of the workplace, but it's an equalities issue that affects everything, because this is also a men's problem as well. It's not just women who have children. This is a problem. The exclusion of women from STEM is a problem for everybody, and it's something that we all need to take an interest in. Jonah Robeson talked a bit about the importance of role models, and I think that is very important. I think, obviously, Jocelyn herself is an excellent role model. And I was pleased that both the current Chief Scientific Officer in Scotland and the previous one were both women, because I think that was saying something important about, of seeing women there in prominent positions in science. That's why it's important that we have, the President of the Royal Society of Chemistry is female. Great, first time. Why is it taking so long? We've had so many good women scientists out there, but why is it taking so long? So it's very good that we have people in those positions. But I think there's also issues about critical mass, because I think if all you see is one woman in a position, that doesn't necessarily make other women feel that they too can achieve in that. I mean, I think we lost a former Prime Minister last week, who obviously was different in her political views to I was, but I think seeing a woman in that position didn't necessarily mean that other women felt, oh yes, I could also be Prime Minister. You've got to have that sort of critical mass. People have to see enough women doing things to feel that that is a job where women feel comfortable and feel accepted and so on. So I think that's important about the issue about critical mass. But I also think that succession planning is important, because there's no point getting a load of women to the top and there's nobody else coming up. And I think I sometimes say, I'm going to go say a little bit about my experience in politics in a minute, because I think some of those issues are maybe demonstrated through that as well. And essentially, the message I would want to put out there is that this is actually not just about what governments can do or what laws can be passed. This is about cultural change. And cultural change does sometimes need to be reinforced by legislation. There's always a debate that it doesn't necessarily have to be, but sometimes it needs to be reinforced by legislation. So it's also finding that balance as to what needs to be done legislatively and what actually means about us all working to change the culture around that in order to make that sustainable. So anyway, I left a job where women were underrepresented and went into another job where women were underrepresented. And also, incidentally, another one, I had spent years in fixed-term contracts, and eventually, when I had my job, I actually had a permanent position, which always takes quite a while in science to get that. And then I came out and went into another job with fixed-term contracts. I mean, how daft is that? But anyway, if you look at the House of Commons only has, I think it's 22% of MPs are female, even now, even despite action that some of the parties have taken. The Scottish Parliament did better. I think there was always intention that Scottish Parliament should be more gender equal, but it is only 36% of MSPs are female, and it was 37% in 1999, so we haven't really made a great deal of progress even since then. Now, my own party, the Labour Party, did quite controversially at the time, both of the general election in 97 and the Scottish parliamentary election in 99, take affirmative action to try and get more women representatives in both of the houses. One of the things we found, having done that in 1999 when I went into the Scottish Parliament, and we had almost half, I think just under half of our MSPs in the Labour Party were women, that gradually it was eroded. And what we found is that having had this twinning exercise, which is terribly controversial, and we were all the women who were depicted as we were all bozos according to the media and that sort of, we were all stupid people that put our handbags on the desk and all this. I mean, we met a whole load of prejudice actually because affirmative action had been taken in order to get more women in. But what we found actually is as women left, some women retired, a couple of my colleagues went on to the Westminster Parliament, other women left it for other reasons. In every case, they were in that constituency, they were succeeded by a man. A man always got that job after. It wasn't being sustained. And the only reason, actually, and I can say that because Shauna's not here, the only reason that in the Labour Party we have 50% representation of females is because we got absolutely gubbed in 2011. If we hadn't got absolutely gubbed in 2011, because we had affirmative action on the list, we've got a lot of people in from, if we hadn't done, we would have lost a lot of the gains that we had made in 1999. So I think the message I would want to put out there from that is don't do it once and think it's sorted, because it's not. You have to keep your eye on the ball, you have to keep the pressure up until the culture actually changes. And the other issue, I mean, which always worries me a lot actually as a woman who has argued for gender equality and women's representation for many years, is that there's also the difficulty of bringing other women along behind who are the younger women. I mean, I'm 58, I don't intend to be in Parliament until I'm 80. I think, I actually think that people should make way when they get older and let other talented people come forward and take the positions. And one of the really good things I have to say actually about what happened in 2011 is some of those people who were brought in are very talented young women who probably wouldn't have had the chance otherwise. So we are seeing the talented young women who've come in. But it's actually to get plenty of those people in positions and actually seeing that job is there for them. We don't have enough women on our local councils. We don't have enough women in many spheres of elected representation, and there's a lot of work. We keep thinking we've sorted it, and we haven't sorted it. So we really have to take the necessary steps to affect the cultural change that's required to really make a change. And finally, and I must apologise because I have to dash off, not quite as early as Shona did, but I have to be back in Parliament for 1:45, so I'm not here to be able to hear, sadly, everything people are going to say. But sometimes I regret coming out of science, and the particular time is, there's always that smell about chemistry laboratories, isn't there? And if I go into a laboratory, I smell that smell, I get this hugely nostalgic sort of feeling about, why did I leave this, Sometimes in politics it's particularly nasty, I think that as well. But but I think, when I'm being positive, that actually there's something you bring as a STEM-trained person into other jobs. And I actually think, as a contribution I can make as a politician, because I was trained as a scientist. And, I think it's not necessarily all negative that people come out of science. Science is a tremendous training, and you bring something of that if you keep that in you. You never take it out of you. You take the women out of science, but you're not taking the scientists out of the women, because you're still a scientist. You still have that sort of perspective, and you can that can be very beneficial in other lines of work. So it's not all negative that we're coming out, but you've got to have the opportunities. We really need to feminise so many areas of achievement, that we have to see women as being integral to many of those jobs. And I certainly hope that we will keep our eye on what's happening. This has been a very, very important piece of work, but it's not going to change things tomorrow, and we have to keep plugging in there. We keep our eye on it, and certainly within the CPG. I see Bristow's here. I think we should be maybe looking at scheduling in future meetings when we're actually looking at a progress report and what's happening with it. So thanks very much, and my apologies for this.
Thank you very much indeed, Elaine. That was really interesting, particularly the kind of overlaps between politics and STEM. I think it says something, doesn't it, if you left STEM because it was women friendly and you found politics more women friendly than STEM. That says something. You talked also about role models, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce next a very excellent role model for women in science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and that's Professor Leslie Yellow-Lees, who is Vice Principal at the University of Edinburgh, Head of College of Science and Engineering, and is President, as earlier speakers have mentioned, of the Royal Society of Chemistry. So welcome, and come up, Leslie.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. I find myself, how many of us do stop when we're 20 odd and think of our career plan for the next 30, 40 years. I did not. So I find myself as the President of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and I am the first woman president in 171 years, so it's taken a while. And I find myself as the Head of College of Science and Engineering at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm the first woman to take on that role. And I was the first woman Head of Chemistry at Edinburgh before that. I didn't set out to do that, but having found myself in that position, I have been determined to take gender equality as part of something that I want to push hard. I think it's important. And I think it's important that when we find ourselves, or when I have got to this position, when I can use the position I'm in to champion equality and diversity, that I use it. And so I'm passionate about doing that, and I have done it a lot, and I will continue to do it until somebody tells me to stop and sit down a while. I've just put a couple of slides together. This is my favourite slide from Tapping All Our Talents. This is the slide I use all the time. It's my favourite, but it doesn't make happy reading, does it? Because it shows for all subjects of STEM that if you look at the standard grade and then you look at the professor end at the other end, all of them have a downward slope. And what upsets me the most in this picture is chemistry, because that's my subject area. And if you look at chemistry, which is a sort of turquoisey blue colour, it's got the steepest decline of them all. So if we look and we see undergraduates, for example, over 50% of undergraduates taking chemistry are female. And yet if we look at professors in chemistry, it's 6%. So we go from over 50%, in other words, females are overrepresented in chemistry at university as an undergraduate, and we look to the professors, to their role models, there's only 6% of them are female. Now this is 2008 data, but when I was head of chemistry and I put forward the department to get the Silver Swan Award, and I went down to the Royal Society, because at that time the Royal Society was giving out the awards, and I went to collect it. That was in 2005-06. I was told that at that point in time, as a professor in chemistry, I was more rare than a giant panda. I have been likened to many things in my life. But I think we're doing better in Edinburgh now, because we've got 2 giant pandas in Edinburgh, and we've got 3 women professors in chemistry, so we're doing pretty good. And that actually gives me my opportunity to show my favourite picture. Because Alice and I were actually talking about that only earlier today. And I didn't tell you, Alice, I was going to show you this picture. But Alice and I were very fortunate last year to be invited to go and feed the pandas. And, you get asked to do lots of different things. This actually, I think, was because I was president of the Royal Society of Chemistry. You get invited to do lots of different things with your roles. This is one of my favourites. It was great, wasn't it, Alice? And maybe they'll be catching up in Edinburgh Zoo, they're going to have more. So I'm going to go back to Edinburgh now, and I'm going to have to work harder to get some more professors of chemistry in there. So, as I say, I am in a fortunate position. I am asked to present a lot. So what I thought, I've just put up some of the activities that I've done over the last year using that slide that I showed you first, because that's the slide I want to take round, because that's the slide I think for me is the most, in academia certainly, is one of the most telling messages from the report. So wherever I possibly can, I will accept an invitation to go and speak about gender equality. And I've spoken at the universities of Dundee. I admit I do a lot south of the border as well, Leeds, Oxford and Warwick universities. I think that's a good cross-section. I would love to speak at more. Unfortunately, my timetable doesn't always permit. But, everywhere you go, you hear the same stories. You hear the same stories of people looking for role models, of people looking for mentoring, of people looking for solutions to help them have an academic career. And many of them can come up with good suggestions. We shouldn't think that everything in the report, which is great and helps us form it, but there's lots of people out there who also have good experiences and who have been to other places that we can learn from, and that we should listen to them, and then we should look to see what we can take from them and help them implement. And that's where I see one of my jobs as a senior person in the university now and in the Royal Society of Chemistry. I am in the position now to take some of these suggestions and work with them. I've done some work with the EPSSC, that's the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, who are quite exercised by the whole gender equality and the lack of women PIs on a lot of their research grants. I mean, if you look at the latest figures from the EU, only 16% of PIs are female. That's terrible. Why is it so small? So part of me is comforted. It isn't only Scotland. It isn't only the UK. It is wider than that. But how sad it is wider than that, and how sad it is that they all have the same problems and we have to work with them. So I think the report, although it is published in Scotland from the Royal Society of Edinburgh, I think it has a very much wider role to play, and I hope to be able to help do that. I've also spoken internationally on it. I mean, it's, here's the fun trips. So you get, I've been to America, I've been to Singapore. In fact, I did Malaysia over Skype, which was interesting. I don't know if anybody have presented at a big conference over Skype, but when you do it, and you do it to the screen, so you don't actually see anybody. And it's then you realise, actually, you rely heavily on the body language. Luckily, you're not all falling asleep, so it's going okay. But it was a really weird thing to do, and it's not something, actually, I would rush back to do again. But I think it's an important thing to do because it is a way to get out to other parts of the world that it is quite difficult to get to any other way. And I've also spoken in industry, for example, at Procter & Gamble. I've had plenty of meetings with policymakers, such as Alistair Allen here in Scotland, John Perkins, who is the science advisor at BIS, and I was told I had a 30-minute appointment with him. In fact, I ended up speaking to him for over 90 minutes. And all he wanted to talk about was equality, gender equality, and what BIS could do to help that push forward. It's very high on their agenda, and this is an opportunity I don't think we should miss at the moment. I think it's something that we should take forward, and that when we get the opportunities, we should use it. Anne Glover, I had a lovely conversation with her in Belgium. Oh, I went to Belgium as well, and spoke to her. Esther McVeigh, who is the Labour MP for the Wirral. No, she's the Tory MP for the Wirral. And is highly supportive. And in fact, we put on the Royal Society of Chemistry her show, which is all about promoting women and giving girls role models to take forward. Put that on at the Royal Society of Chemistry, and then had a dinner for as many influential women who wished to come along. And it was a really successful evening. And Valerie Vaz, who's in Labour, she also spoke to me and wishes to work with me to help move these agendas forward. So there's plenty of champions out there. It's getting hold of them and then working with them. But I think we have to put the effort in and to be able to do that. Organisations, well, of course, there's EPSRC, there's the Royal Society of Chemistry. It's been a wonderful platform for me being their president and being supported by them really to speak out about gender equality and diversity as a whole. I've been to BIS workshops. And, of course, University of Scotland, their RCEC committee, has worked very hard to push a lot of the Tapping All Our Talents, and I've worked along with them for the last year. And it's been very rewarding. You get your moment of glory, of course, or whether some people would think it's your moment of glory on the radio and the newspaper. But it's fun, and I like doing it, and I think it's another way to speak and get across your message to people. You've got to make it light-hearted often, and I try to do that. And I'm just the Rosalind Franklin Award every year goes to a female, and it went to Polly Arnold in the Department of Chemistry at School of Chemistry at Edinburgh, and she's made a film about inspirational women, so that's just about to be released. So I haven't seen it yet, so maybe I'll be taking that off when I see what she's got me saying. Finally, in the University of Edinburgh, here I find myself in a senior academic position that I can make a difference. And I have tried very hard to make a difference there. So I have championed Athena Swan, and, for example, for physics, I have tried very hard to do that. So one of the things I went in 18 months ago was I said that I wanted all my 7 schools that I'm responsible for to look to put in for an Athena Swan. And that really is it gives you something concrete to do when you say that. And it gives people something to work towards. And it is about laying down a baseline and then improving that, your performance from that upwards. So I have made it that, and I've had great support from HR and from Caroline Wallace, who's, I think's here, there she is, in the audience. She came in and helped me enormously, and I owe her a great debt of gratitude, as well as to the schools, who I think actually we all will have them.
By the end of next
by the end of next week, we'll all have submitted. That's the best place to be, isn't it? I mean, actually, the best place is when they've all got it, but it's a great place when they've all submitted. And then you can still, you know they're all going to get it. So by the end of next week, they'll all have submitted. And I think that's a great achievement because it has made them all the 7 schools and all the heads of school look to see what it is they can do within their school to help their young academics have a career and to feel supported. And, it's the feeling supported. And I think to put that up in everybody's mind was the thing I set myself out to do. So I've done that. Now I've got to find myself another... well, I think it's to get them all up to gold, because it was a fantastic achievement when chemistry at Edinburgh got the gold award. It was only the 2nd award in the whole of the UK. The first one was another chemistry department, interestingly. Considering it has the steepest decline, I think it's recognised it has that steep decline and is really working hard throughout the UK to get itself better. But we are the 2nd. It's fabulous. And I want to use that, and I would like everybody to get it, and I would like the university to go from being a bronze to being a silver, because I think Queen's Belfast is the only silver one in the UK. I would like Edinburgh to be the next silver, so I'll work towards that. That's my next goal. It's always good to set yourself goals. So that's simply some of the things I've been doing. I think it's a great report. I think it's been enormously helpful. The data in there has been enormously helpful. I have enjoyed giving these presentations. I will continue to do that. And if you want me to do something out there, please just let me know, because I am sympathetic. I do want to do it, but I need people to tell me what it is they want me to do, and then I'll be happy to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Leslie. And I think that shows the importance of people like yourself, not only as role models, but also exercising active leadership in terms of making a difference. And clearly there are all the perks of the job, like feeding pandas as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark Batho, who is Chief Executive of the Scottish Further and Higher Education Funding Council. And I think one of those things which is another part of the puzzle, or the combination, which is sympathetic male allies. So thank you very much indeed, Mark.
Well, there's a billing to live up to. Thank you very much, Fiona. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today, and can I congratulate the Royal Society as well on actually really lending their weight to this initiative, because actually the brand of the Royal Society is enormously important in actually getting the world to take all of this seriously. So I think this is terrific, and the fact that it continues is also important, because it isn't just going away, it isn't a flash in the pan. So hugely supportive of what the Royal Society is doing here, and power to all of your elbows. Shona Robison talked about this as actually an economic agenda, and I think she was quite right to do so. It's also a social agenda. The Funding Council plays in both of those areas. I've always thought that we have our responsibilities as the Funding Council to actually improve the prospects of people in Scotland generally. So that's why we support universities and why we support colleges generally. That's why we have particular initiatives such as supporting early years researchers and the like, and why we have our widening access initiatives and provisions. So we have that sense of wanting to better society in Scotland, and I see this initiative as an integral part of that, if you like, social mission. But it is much more than that, as the Minister said, because it is an economic mission. The fact that you got that fall-off in numbers of people from a very healthy undergraduate proportion of women going into the STEM subjects to those figures right down at the bottom at the end indicates to me, notwithstanding, and I absolutely take Dr. Murray's point that there are many transferable skills that come through into other parts of the economy from people who are trained as scientists, but nevertheless, there must be opportunity within Scotland when actually all of our business is crying out for more STEM graduates and more STEM postgraduates to say, well, we've actually got to get better at all of this. And the Funding Council, I think, has two specific roles. Above everything, it has loads of money, and that does help because money does talk and it can influence people. And it does influence people. Actually, in one of my first days in the job, I met with a whole bunch of university chairs, and my colleague said to them that he was amazed at the capacity of universities, who are quite rich organisations overall, to follow small trails of crumbs and to be bribed by relatively small sums of money. I haven't changed my opinion since then, and so I think that there are real opportunities going forward to get quite a lot of difference with quite small financial levers. But we do have the opportunity, first of all, actually to increase the overall supply of STEM, because notwithstanding your slide, Leslie, at the top, we don't have enough people coming into STEM in the first place. There's a good proportion of them are women, but there aren't enough. And so we're able, on the back of guidance that we got from the Scottish Government, to enhance the number of places that are available for STEM and to take various actions to make sure that there is a reasonable supply of undergraduate places for everybody going forward. Then, of course, we've got to make sure with as much effort as we can that those places translate, as they do already, into a reasonable gender balance, but then that actually the actions that are taken by our institutions going forward are such that they positively encourage the retention of women, of other minority interests in these subjects to the greater good of Scotland. And that's where the likes of our supporting Athena, Swan and the like come in. I think the point was made very forcibly by the minister, but anyway, whoever made it, that actually Athena Swan must not disappear under the weight that is now being put upon it, because it is the agenda of the moment, which is terrific. I'll certainly take that message back to the Funding Council, and of course we need to take it to the Higher Education Funding Council in England, which is has got lots more money than we have, but to make sure that that agenda is properly cemented in as we go forward. Because those kind of initiatives, those kind of levers, if you like, are terribly important in making sure that you can gradually tip those falling graphs up in the right direction. It's a cultural thing, and it's going to be enormously difficult to do. It's going to take a lot of time, and we shouldn't expect instant results. But I can say that the Funding Council will be very supportive of those initiatives going forward. And I have to say, actually, not just in STEM. I think the achievement that Leslie has achieved in chemistry of getting that first gold award is fantastic. And I absolutely laud your ambition to spread that around other departments and across Edinburgh University. I should say, those of you that have seen the press this morning, that I'm actually moving on from the Funding Council, and I'm going to Abertay University to be Vice Principal there. And I promise at this stage to give you a run for your money in terms of getting another university right up into the upper echelons of Athena Swan. I think that's all I want to say just now. As a Funding Council, we have a huge commitment to this agenda. We do, as I say, have loads of money, which helps. And it is, above everything, we have a commitment within our council, amongst our council members, that recognises that this is a challenge that is going to be long-term, that has to be addressed, for the greater good of higher education in Scotland and for the economy in Scotland. And for that reason, I'm delighted to be here. I commit the Funding Council, even though I won't be there, to continued support. But above everything, watch Abertay. It's going to be an exciting story. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark, for focusing, I think, our attention on some of the levers that are available and some of the key players and the ways in which things like funding decisions can shape outcomes. And also for reminding us that a little bit of healthy competition is very good as well. And if we could all be sort of thinking that competition about gender equality is the way forward, that would be wonderful. Okay, I'd like to move on now, please, to Dr. Margaret Ann Craig, who is CEO of the Clyde Biosciences Limited new startup company, and who also is the Royal Academy of Engineering National Entrepreneur of 2012, amongst many other sorts of awards and accolades. So, Margaret Ann, without any further ado, if you could come and take the platform. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and I'm grateful to the Royal Society to invite me to come along and tell my story. So currently, I am CEO of Clyde Biosciences, which is the first spin-out from the Medical and Life Sciences faculty in the history of the University of Glasgow. And I thought what I would do is tell you a little bit of the story of the journey to be here and the challenges that I have faced. So I did my first degree at Strathclyde and then went on to do a Master's and PhD through University of Glasgow in pathophysiology of cancer, and then I went on to study cardiovascular physiology. During my PhD, I did something which made things a little tougher for me. I got married and had 2 children. So that was a difficult process to maintain all that and finish my thesis and get that submitted. At the end of that, I really wanted to work part-time for a space of time in order to spend some time with my children. But in order to do so, there were really no part-time jobs as postdoctoral scientists. So what I did for over 5-6 years was to do a role as a technician, a lower-grade technician, in order to work part-time. But during that time, I worked as that highly skilled scientist. But that I realised I had to do in order to continue. If I left, I didn't think the chances of getting back in and maintaining a career or restarting a career would be extremely low. So having 2 children, being a scientist, 2 children in nursery and a low salary, I was really in negative equity for quite a long time. But I saw it as an investment and I really didn't want to leave. I think one of the issues that has been touched on is that I really wanted to go back to work full-time and to get a job and a full-time postdoctoral job. And one of the things I was really aware of is that it's very difficult to actually persuade research councils or my academic leader or PI to actually apply for research funding on a part-time basis. They said it really just didn't really exist. And also, for them, they didn't really want to see a part-time scientist coming through, especially a woman who may take more time off in order to have more children. And that's, when they have to maintain momentum, it's one thing that is really not quite appealing to them. And I see that still in the lab all the time. That mentality hasn't really changed, and I still think the opportunities from research councils to help fund part-time postdoctoral positions and help keep women in science, but also allow them to come back in and work part-time and support them anyway, I don't feel it really exists to a great extent yet. So I worked part-time for a long time and on low-paid month-to-month contracts. Eventually, I managed to get a full-time postdoctoral position, and that was great to get back into science and try to restart my career. During that time, over my scientific career, I had been working on products for commercialisation. I'd been developing assays, technology that had real commercial potential. During this time, we realised that that we needed someone to come in and try to drive this into a business. So I then took on a role for a few months, come out of my scientific career to try to drive the commercial products into market. During that time, I applied for a BBSRC Royal Society Enterprise Fellowship. For me, this was a real turning point in that it gave me 1 full year of salary. It also gave me 1 full year of business training and lots of support. And that really helped me to take all the technology and all the science that we'd developed with great commercial potential and try to get it into market. During that time, we formed the spin-out company, Cloud Biosciences. So things are going well with the company. And we also went on to brought in investment, and we're, just now we are doing really quite well. Also during that time, I was advised to apply for the Royal Academy of Engineering, a UK entrepreneur role. This was a great process for me, and I went along to be interviewed for this, and the university, when I got shortlisted, put together a mock interview for me. This consisted of a room of 8 of senior people from the University of Glasgow, all male, interviewing me, preparing me for this interview in London. I got quite a grilling, and during that time they said to me, how on earth do you expect to create a multi-million-pound company and lead this? So I had a bit of convincing to do. I then went along to the final interview in the Royal Academy of Engineering. Again, into the room, 8 male interviewees, and I started to realise there was a bit of a theme there. There were not many females within engineering and science at that level. I won that award, and it was a unanimous vote by all 8 panel members. This was great for me and also great for the company. It was a great profile for us. We've since gone on then to be shortlisted as Scottish Innovators of the Year, and also by the Times Higher Education Awards for outstanding contribution to technology and innovation. It's the first that the University of Glasgow has ever been shortlisted in any of the Times Higher Education Awards. So now I'm CEO of this company, and as a female that also raises many challenges in itself. Most of which really boils down to childcare, because I had to try and juggle childcare and juggle my children and also be able to travel internationally. Every week I need to walk through the door to my grandparents, the children's grandparents, and say, can you help me yet again? Can you help me look after children for a few days? This is where I need to go. This is where I need to be. Fortunately, me, I have that backup. But there are many people out there that do not have that. And to be honest, childcare for me is one of the biggest infrastructure problems within the country, and that we do not have enough of it, and it's too expensive. And we really need childcare to exist at all levels, not just at the very sort of early stage, but for me, I struggle now with looking after an 11 and 13-year-old and maintaining this job. So it does start from the very beginning to nursery, right through to this stage. It's a major challenge for me. Also, being a female CEO, I have to juggle the children, but I also feel that I have to work harder all the time to prove myself. And within the boardroom, my colleagues will always say, you're the hardest working person we know. The reason for that is it's been hard work to get there, and I feel that if I take my foot off the gas, I'll turn around and someone else may be sitting in my place. Mm-hmm. And I think that exists for a lot of women in jobs at that level. So it boils down to, how do we make this more attractive? To jump through all those hoops, how do we make careers in such as STEM or helping women into positions, boardroom positions, how do we make that more attractive to them? Because it is really difficult. Just now, one of the things I see at the very early stage, we have to encourage our children and to enjoy science and make it more attractive to them. My 13-year-old daughter is now in the process of choosing her final subjects at school. And she didn't quite know what to choose, but she said, after years of being in and out of science lab, and like you, sitting in the corner of a room, two children being in the lab they shouldn't really be in, she said to me, I think I would like to do science. And that was quite a big surprise to me, having watched what my career was like. We went through the interview about the options for school. The new curriculum has dropped some science, and what she wanted to do was study at least 2 sciences. Her school was only giving her the opportunity to study 1. So I look at that and say, how do we get more scientists out there? How do we, for us, we have to face some major scientific global challenges in the future, and how do we compete if in our schools we're not delivering all the science that people need? So there was quite an outcry about this, and the head teacher is considering allowing children to study 2 sciences again. So also, we are facing major challenges in the future, one of which is to produce enough engineers and scientists in order to face challenges such as climate change, energy, healthcare issues that we face for the future. And recently I attended one of the first ever conferences on global grand engineering challenges in London. There were over 500 of the best engineers worldwide from China, the US and the UK. And on that day I was invited to speak. It was great as a female to be standing on that platform with Bill Gates and Will.I.am. So, unbeknown to me, Will.I.am is a STEM ambassador. And he stood up and gave his reasons why he wanted to see more people doing science. And I thought, you're a fantastic role model. Because he's trendy, and a lot of people will listen to him. One of the things he said to us was, you scientists should try and change your image. You're a little bit boring, nerdy. He said, look what I've had to go through in order to, become what I am. He said, as an entertainer, he says, we are taken and our images are really moulded and modelled. And that, he said, is what gets us onto the platform. So his idea was that, he said, in the future, he said, we're sitting here today and you're facing some global challenges that we need scientists to try and overcome. He said, you guys are really superheroes. He said, if I was you, he said, and I had the skills and the talent and the potential to save the planet, I would be wearing a cape. And he said, and I would really be wondering about showing off. He said, this is something that you have to remember. You have to encourage these children to be superheroes. His other comment was, STEM. He said, what does STEM really mean? He said, think of the name, think about what it means. He said, perhaps what you should do is take a little bit of art and put the A into STEM and make it STEAM. He said, because that sounds a wee bit better. He says, and create STEAM, teams of STEAM. He says, and create some more superheroes. So along the way, I've learnt a lot and I've come across a lot of problems in order to be able to sustain this career. But I'm coming out the other side of it and hopefully we'll stay there at that level for a bit longer. And one thing I'm doing just now is working with both Scottish and UK governments in order to tell the story and look at ways of making this better. So I understand what it means to sit in the Select Committee in Biz and to tell this story and answer their questions. I'm also working with John Swinney about women in enterprise and looking at ways of supporting more women, getting more women into business such as me, because we're not doing enough of that. So, and I'm looking forward to seeing how we can make a difference to the future. Thank you.
Margaret Ann, that was wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. And I think it's great to get people's personal stories because I think they put a human face on that graph that Leslie showed about the leaky pipeline. And I guess also one of the kind of reasons why we probably should have more women in science is that they would not be tempted, no matter how much of a superhero they are, to wear their pants over their tights. I would like to now introduce, last but not least, Anne Henderson, who's Assistant Secretary at the STUC and whose responsibilities include government and parliamentary liaison and also secretariat to the Women's Committee of the STUC. So, Anne, thank you.
So thank you very much. I think we probably all have identified with different things that all of the speakers have said so far. I found it really interesting. What we were asked to look at, what today is looking at, I think, is the progress, or how we can assess what progress has been made over the last year since the report was published. And within that, where does responsibility lie for taking that forward? And I've already, a couple of questions have kind of occurred to me in the information that's been presented so far, and I'm wondering, I don't know the answer to this, maybe it can come up, but are we tracking in those statistics that we keep which women come back into STEM? So if we're actually following something which has set out that 52% of female graduates leave, are we hopefully setting up a system that means that we can show, is some of the work we are doing making a difference, and in years to come, can we show paths that women take? I'm very, very conscious from the work that I do in the trade union movement that women's lives change. I think that we make a mistake to talk of women in one category or another, and it's not just this discussion about are we mothers, carers, politicians, community activists, and the paid employment that we do. It's the fact that you might decide, you might have been working in a technician's job or in a less skilled job in a scientific environment, but decide at a later stage to study and go into an academic career and then enter that kind of catchment area that this RSE report's been looking at. So I just think we need to be a little bit more, flexible or careful about how we talk about women's lives and how we're working with women, because it would be fantastic for me if one of the outcomes was that a number of women in their 40s and 50s decided that career change or higher education, actually further in higher education, became a real option for them and opened up doors in STEM occupations. I think that we all have a responsibility, that's clear, and I sort of was thinking so what's the responsibility as a trade unionist? And I think that obviously covers workplace issues, but it also covers, who do we ask questions and why and when? And I think we do have to ask questions through all our parliamentary committees. We have to examine how money's being spent, if projects are set up, if a government decides to invest significant amount of money in big spend construction projects. We just need to ask the question, how will that spend, how that creates X number of jobs in particular skills and sectors, what is the current proportion of women employed in those sectors, and how do you intend to increase that? It's not about either or, it's about saying if there's going to be a big project offshore in the oil sector, then, or big projects around renewables that have been referred to, if we know that the percentage of women in the different grades of post is X amount, and it's not 50%, then what questions are we asking about how we can increase that? And there's an expectation that we begin to build in as politicians and as workers in those fields, that we will seek to redress imbalance wherever it exists. And I would be concerned that some of the narrative that's developing is saying investing in science and constructions means we're not investing in sectors where women are because women are primarily to be found in the care sector. It's kind of like a conversation that's not going to help if we're trying to increase the numbers of women rightly and stem that leaky pipeline in science and engineering, technology and mathematics. So I think we have to be a bit more forthright in the questioning and what we expect of public spend. I think over the last year, but I think it depends how you look at this. I see real change. I see in the last 20 years, I really don't think that all our young people question in the way that that some of us are doing just now, they see female engineers, they see female mathematicians, they see female construction workers. And that's what we see. Now, we know the statistical proportions are very small, but the work that's being done in the sector to promote the image has to be commended. And if you pick anything up now, magazines, you will see that women are being used as examples, and I think that's a good thing. I was in last night at another event in this building, and I picked up the Resource magazine, and it's fantastic. The spring master classes talking about young people, how to be a bridge builder, with a woman talking on that. Kitchen chemistry, Dr. Lynn Patterson. You know, they're example after example. The work that the RSE is doing in Lochaber, women in science. Everybody is doing their bit, if you like. And from where I'm working within the trade union movement as a trade union official, I have some. I can identify with a number of the situations that Margaret Ann was describing about going into rooms with 8 men and so on. But the truth actually is that half of the General Council, which is the governing body of the Scottish Trade Union Congress, this is the 3rd year in a row that slightly more than half of that body has been female. The face of trade unionism in Scotland is increasingly female. We have a female General Secretary prospect is here today, and that's the reality. So let's not let's not underestimate what's actually changing and what's happening. So for our women shop stewards in the workplace, in whatever grade of work, that's extremely important. This year at STUC Congress, we awarded 3 awards for work done by union reps in the workplace. One on learning in the workplace, which is tremendously important for picking up on the point I made earlier about possibly giving women and men in particular jobs now the opportunity to develop learning and skills on an ongoing, lifelong basis, and maybe move on to other career courses and paths in later life. Learning award winner was female. The Equality Award winner was a woman this year, and the Health and Safety Award winner was the senior convener from Diageo in Fife. So 3 women won the 3 awards for our union reps. And again, that's what's happening in the workplace. And the question of health and safety has huge overlaps, obviously very important, but it also has huge overlaps with some of the issues that the RSE report raised about what is it that makes, one of the factors that makes women turn away will just be that workplace culture. There's just a limit to how many times you have to argue about the fact you can't get a better pair of safety shoes that fit, or work protective hand equipment that is safe. And you shouldn't have to be arguing about that anymore. And with a good health and safety rep adhering to the legislation in conjunction with management, that could all be sorted. It shouldn't be an individual woman's struggle. So those things are very important, and there's a lot of very good experience out there that we can build on together. Just to pick on a couple of other points that I think cut across all the sectors. We've been doing some work, as the Minister referred. We're working with the government on points arising from the Women's Employment Summit. And the STC is preparing at the moment we meet every 6 months with the First Minister. We're preparing the papers for that forthcoming meeting in June. And one of the agenda items is to look with the Scottish Government about what's happening in the labour market in general, and what we call casualisation of labour, fragmentation of the workforce, and such things as 0 hours contracts. Now, we've been particularly looking at the impact 0 hours contracts are having in the care sector, where it actually is impossible, whilst it may half the cost of delivering the service, and anybody who's looking at a local authority level at buying in a service that is cheaper should really look at this. It may reduce the costs, but it also means there's no infrastructure. If you're employing care workers who are paid hour to hour, week to week, there is no proper structured care or childcare infrastructure that the women we're talking about in STEM can then access on a regular and structured basis. So we have to tackle the childcare issue together, because with a workforce that is not properly paid, not properly valued, talk about superheroes, I would put childcare workers in there, you won't have the infrastructure in place that allows some of the other changes in the labour market that we're talking about today with STEM to take place. But that also flags up that zero-hours contracts are a big, big issue in the academic sector, as those of you will know. And the University of College Union has been really systematically raising this through the STUC, but also with government. And the prospect of going onto a PhD, it's not my field, but I understand, of going on to PhD work or postgraduate contracts that aren't really guaranteeing an income for a person, male or female, with a family, you just cut out a whole layer of continuity right from the beginning. And the extension of zero-hours contracts effectively into a far wider part of the academic sector should be of big concern to everybody who's here today. And I think we have to work together on that and not see it as simply happening across one sector. So that discussion that we'll be taking to the First Minister on the 5th of June around the casualisation of the labour market, I think we'll take some of the lessons and themes from today. So I see that as a contribution that the STUC can make to taking forward some of the outcomes and recommendations from the RSC's very helpful report. Another little part of that would be around language and part-time and job share, and I would be interested in exploring that a little bit further. I think many of us who've worked part-time in the past would be pretty clear that part-time is quite difficult to contain to part-time. So that's an issue because it impacts on other people's access to hours of paid employment. But there are also some things I think we should be exploring a bit more about why job sharing it works or is offered in some layers of employment and not in others. And it may be that sometimes a job sharing package might be a better way of approaching some of the STEM sector jobs where there's an identifiable partner in a post to share completing the work rather than the sort of bottomless pit of part-time hours, which sometimes is quite difficult on an individual basis to manage unless your manager is being very, very clear about what you're expected to achieve during those part-time hours. So just finally, just now, I was thinking, like our president this year in the STUC is Harry Frew, who's the regional secretary for the Construction Workers Union, UCAT. And we've had some very interesting conversations with him already about what could we do to demonstrate change in that sector, but also to support some really good work that the construction the business sector is doing around images and supporting apprenticeships with childcare, and there's some excellent good practice going on there. But so we've set ourselves a little target. 0.7% of the trade union UCAT is female, so we're going to double that over the next year. So I think you could probably apply that to some of the other sectors. The workplace culture is a big responsibility, and I know there's been interesting work done at the Women's Centre on Science, Engineering and Technology, but we have a responsibility as a trade union movement. The workplace culture isn't somebody else, and similarly everybody in this room, it's the men and women we work beside. And if the men that we work beside in particular in any job are creating a culture that women find oppressive, bullying and harassing, then we have to tackle that collectively. And there is some responsibility in our movement as well to do that. So there's, again, lots of work going on in that field. So I look forward to the rest of the discussion this morning. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Anne. And again, pointing out yet another one of the crucial partners for work in this area, the labour movement. And I think what was important was both reminding us of the change that has happened, as well as what remains very stubbornly the same. And the fact that this agenda needs to be part of broader sort of women and work agendas, but also the broader kind of economic policy agenda as well. I'm going to now ask the speakers. Elaine needs to go now. Thank you very much, Elaine. But if the rest of the speakers could please take a seat at the front, and then we'll have about half an hour for questions and answers. So if people can... Okay, so as I say, we've got about half an hour. If people could please tell me who they are, let people know who they are before they ask their question. And I think that what we'll do is we'll try and kind of gather up 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then I'll pass it to the panel. So, who would like to go first? Yes.
Hi, my name's Maria Kelly. I work for Celix Galileo, and I've noticed that we're one of the few private sector companies attending here. I don't know if that's a reflection on the mailing list or people who just didn't attend, but what can you do to ensure that the private sector plays their part, which to me is where my interest lies?
My name's Sally Brown, and I chair the Royal Society of Edinburgh Education Committee. One of the things that featured in Anne's presentation was she used the word culture a lot. And one of the first conclusions that were drawn in the tapping all our talents was that we had to have a change in culture. And that includes, of course, a change in the way that all families look at this. We haven't talked about families, and the recommendations don't go for that. If I could give you just an anecdote. My sons are engineers, and their wives are engineers as well. And we were sitting at a family reunion when the youngest of my 8 grandchildren suddenly said, "I hate maths." And we all turned on her. And a friend who was with us said afterwards that actually, in many families, had she said that, there would be a lot of, "Yes, I hate maths too," or "I was no good at maths." And I think one of the groups that we have to get at are the women, because it's particularly the mothers I'm thinking about, who are not scientists, but who have to be careful to encourage and not move children away from a preference for mathematics and science and so on. But of course, changing a culture is not easy. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. And I'd like to hear from those on the panel what they think we should be doing to change the culture in the population in general, as well as all the very good things that we've heard about today. I should say that I graduated with my first degree in physics 56 years ago. And the thing that I find depressing is that many of the same ideas and concerns were around then. So changing the culture is the absolute priority.
Thanks very much indeed. Can we take one more question and then I'll return it to the panel?
I think we also possibly have a culture problem in our schools. I was absolutely horrified by the comment that a pupil could only take one science at the start of their... We have to do something about this. This is something that a group of us with the new curriculum have been worried sick would happen. And it's happening, and I'm terrified. We need to do something about this. For opportunities for everyone to do STEM. It's very important.
Thank you very much. If I can maybe start with Leslie, and if we work our way along, and if you can... so we've got questions
Culture.
about the role of the private sector,
Yep.
and questions about culture. And indeed, I think it's broader than culture, isn't it? The schools question, that's also about the infrastructure that's in place and unintended consequences.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, briefly on them all. I think the culture goes into the private industry. I think if we're talking, we've got to look at the whole package, because if you start singling out bits of it, then that does disadvantage other bits, and that we can't allow that to happen. So I'm delighted that you are here to represent Celix and to represent private company, and well done you. But I think we have to look to see how we can look to embrace the whole community and the whole culture, because unless we do that, then it won't happen, will it? Because we need everybody to have bought into it. The culture, I feel very passionately about that. I think you have to change the culture. I think you have to change the culture in where you're working, in the workplace, and equally well you have to look at the culture of the support network, whether it be schools, whether it be the family, whatever. I thought there's been an interesting piece of work done by the Institute of Physics, in fact, that was just published that said that really if you want more children to take subjects such as maths and physics, etc., what you have to do is to get to the parents, because the parents have quite a large sway as when children are young, when they're get a bit teenage-like, the sway goes out the window, does it not? But, we have to speak to parents and convince them that there's no such thing as a boy job or a girl job, there's just jobs. And to give the role models, to give the opportunities, and I think that is one area of society that we need to look at very strongly, so I'm with you there. As far as the curriculum is concerned, I think we share your anxieties. I think many schools, I have heard tales, and it was not a good tale here, that schools are looking to see how many sciences they're going to offer on the curriculum. I think we have to just make a stand and say, you've got to offer them all. And we just have to be much more positive and less afraid to say it, because sometimes I think we just are afraid to say it, and it may cause difficulties, but so what? If we know it's going to be to have the offer out there for everybody that should have it available to them, then let's be brave and let's just stand up and make people listen, and make schools want to offer that and see the attraction to doing that. Thank you.
Okay. So to answer the first question, I think you're right about the lack of people from industry here.
Margaret Ann, could you just move the mic just a bit nearer to you?
So just now, as a new spin-out company, I'm having to engage and spend a lot of time engaging with industry. And that, for me, I'm having to go out there and find them and find the people to work with. But what I'm also realising as we go along, that we're learning a lot from each other. As I work with these pharma companies, some of their methods and some of the technology they have feeds into us. And I think that this is an example of a platform where how a company works and runs can actually be fed into a formula like this. So a bigger industry presence, I think, would be good. On the subject of culture, certainly one of the things I did notice, my daughter and her friends, when they were choosing in subjects, lots of parents just allowed it to fall into the boys and the girls type subjects, and that's something that I don't think we're really getting away from. I could see Emily and a lot of her girlfriends were all choosing cookery and sort of softer subjects, and the boys were going for more of the science and technology. That doesn't really seem to be changing. I was a little dismayed when I listened to some of the mums say they weren't going to push it or encourage that they actually chose some of the harder subjects. So I think when my daughter, she wanted to do 2 sciences, and she sat in front of the teacher who was really saying, I'm not sure we'll allow this will need approval with the head teacher. She turned around and said to him, look, I don't want to do cookery. I've got a kitchen. I want to do science. I want to work in a lab. And I thought, that for a 13-year-old girl to hit back with that, I thought, good for you. So.
I think Emily's going to go far, isn't she? Can I just address a couple of the points around culture and the curriculum? The culture, of course, nobody is seeking to do their children down. They're wanting the best for their children. So I just add into the mix that when people are sometimes talking in their families, they're looking at job prospects, and this is back to the economic circumstance. Why don't they go into the construction industry when you've got 0.7 membership, I think you said, of UCAT at the moment, because they say, well, what are the job prospects going to be for my daughter in that? And I think getting the messages out and getting a positive momentum around what the economic prospects are of doing these different things. Engineering is always an incredibly difficult one because people have said, oh, we want more people to go into engineering. But people have looked at engineering and at the economic prospects of being an engineer in comparison with, until recently, going into the city or whatever, and made their own judgments. And so I think actually there is a very significant role for the careers advisors to link up with the people that design the school curriculum and encourage people into it, and talk to the parents at the parents' evenings and actually change some of these preconceptions, which are frankly quite often wrong. And just very briefly on the curriculum, I couldn't agree more than with Leslie just now. There is an opportunity, I think, with the whole of Scottish education in change, with Curriculum for Excellence, with the colleges going through a very significant change at the moment, for the university sector actually to get in amongst that ferment and start addressing these things that appear to be beginning to emerge from particularly the change for Curriculum for Excellence, and say, these are the reasons why you need to do 2 sciences in your school. Not just you should do them, but these are the reasons why. And the reasons are that we have a curriculum that runs forward to take people on to particular fields of study and this, that, and the other that require you to do both, for example, chemistry and biology. Subject dear to my heart because I was at a university convention at my daughter's school last night at which they were being given advice by all the different universities, and the 2 science things was right up there. And to explain that, and then actually I think one of the real challenges going forward is to get universities to be able to influence what the curriculum in the schools is themselves. So you don't do your higher in chemistry and your higher in biology or whatever, and then turn up and find a completely different course in the university that you end up with. If you've actually got a cleverly designed curriculum, then people can see directions of travel going forward. And maybe, just maybe, some of the head teachers will get why having at least 2 sciences, and I think you're right, you should have all of them, should be absolutely integral to any good school.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Some of these points have been touched on in the evidence sessions that the Equal Opportunities Committee in the Scottish Parliament was mentioned earlier, and it has started looking in their Women in Work inquiry at some issues around occupational segregation. I think there's certainly been a couple of sessions, and I attended one earlier in April, which was looking at some of the overlaps with Curriculum for Excellence, so it would be worth going back to that. I think that people have flagged up absolutely an unintended consequence, but the sooner we make a lot of noise about it, the better. However, it got me also thinking about this wider discussion about who influences and the culture in the world that we live in. And obviously the culture in the workplace and academic institutions is not separate from the society in which we inhabit, which doesn't distribute power equally between men and women, but it also doesn't attract appropriate value to the jobs that people see women primarily doing still. So I think that the Curriculum for Excellence discussion has to overlap with something about what's happening in schools around girl jobs, boy jobs, or whatever you want to call that, around training, around the value that is attached to childcare and early years education, because unless we overlap that, we'll end up reinforcing the divisions that we see in society just now. And I think that early years education and a good system of supported childcare with well-trained workers who also understand and know about teaching science through play and a whole lot of those early interventions that make such a difference in a child and a family's understanding of what science and mathematics and technology can actually be about comes from a very tiny age. It doesn't start when they're 12, as you will know. So I'd be interested in looking at how we could pick that up and through that better support parents. Parents are workers too, and they may well be employed themselves in a situation, in a job, where they have no technical skill or knowledge themselves. They didn't learn about science through school, and it's scary when a child starts coming home with homework that you don't understand at all. it's easier to support a child in homework that you do understand. So we need to find some way of giving more credit and resource to some of the like after school and homework clubs and support that are around a family rather than totally focusing on parents. The private sector point, absolutely, we through the trade unions very keen to work, and we've got some good partnership working going on in a number of private sector workplaces. So I think we should be looking at how we can take that forward together. I just think it's an opportunity to, if you like, take occupational segregation out of the box. Like, we need to think a bit wider, and that's why I think the discussion around education early education has really got a lot of potential as well.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got time for possibly another 2 or 3. Oh, wow. 2 or 3 questions. Okay. Shall we... there's somebody in a red top halfway along.
Hello, I'm Maureen Cooper. I did a lot of women in science work over many years, taking a bit of a rest from it just now. I'd like to come back to the culture idea. One of the most recent projects I was involved with was European-level research in 7 different countries, looking at factors influencing girls' choices towards engineering, the factors that could influence them staying in the courses, and then career progression. And we looked at the culture. It was a bit different in different countries, but a key thing we came up with was the idea of identifying the gatekeepers. So these are the people who enforce the cultural attitudes. So what you find is there's lots of women who have aspiration, and people at senior level in companies want the best people to come through because that's best for the organisation. So who are the people in the middle who are actually the ones who are failing to implement what's required, and then to look at training that could be done to enhance bringing on diversity and equality issues and people's progression in a company, or reward. It's difficult in universities, but the middle managers' performance needs to be measured against targets that would be set in those sorts of areas. Training is absolutely essential for things like interview panels, not just for chairs, but for every member. It's looking at things in a systematic way like that and implementing change that will eventually change the culture.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to pass your microphone just behind you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Raffaello Cone. I'm Professor of Chemical Engineering at Heriot-Watt. Well, I think that I would like really to ask the panel if there is anything that can be done at this level of, I don't like the leaking pipe. And I think that it's not just when you start, because we have done a lot of work in schools, and I think that in chemical engineering we have 1/3 of students who are females. But the problem is that I heard that, for instance, in oil and gas, where they go, most of them, the support is not such that they can go to the top. And equally, I realize only now that, I became professor in 1999. I was the first professor of chemical engineering in Scotland, the second one in the country. And I realize also only now how much difficult is to make your way through it. I mean, when I was younger, I didn't care so much, and you work harder and you try to show, oh no, the culture is fine, everything is fine. Only now I realize that there is a culture, and unfortunately we have to do something about this culture. So really now, next step, I would like to see a lot of work done on the pipe, of the leaking pipe, because, and like you said, also at the middle management level, not just for people entering. By the way, another anecdote, when I decided to do chemical engineering and my brother decided to do philosophy, my parents thought there is something wrong in this family. How can we actually get this right?
Okay, I'm going to take, I think, two more quick questions, and then we'll ask the panel to wrap up very quickly. So, in the interests of gender balance, I'm going to take this gentleman here, and then the gentleman right at the very back. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's not often that I find myself in the minority, so thank you for the comment. My name's Derek Elder. I'm here today as chairman of the Engineering Policy Group Scotland. My wife is the Europe, Middle East and Africa director for her company. I have no idea where she is right now, but it's somewhere in the Middle East. The reason I mention that is that we've been through the childcare nightmare that's come up so often this morning. So I would just like to ask the panel, what would the ideal childcare model be that would allow parents to work and companies to get the benefit of their employees' training? We're talking about STEM, but it needn't be that. But what's the model?
Thank you. And the gentleman right at the back. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Ian Wall. I'm chair of STEMIC. A comment and then a question. On the wider question of culture and science, STEM, GTCS is currently undergoing a consultation, a public consultation, which anybody can contribute to, on the qualifications for entering into ITE, initial teacher education. Our committee recommended that we should upgrade the science qualifications for students wanting to become teachers, both in terms of number and quality. And clearly, if you want to create a culture in which science is part of our culture rather than something left over on the side, then we need teachers who are comfortable with it. And so I think this is something, certainly we've made our recommendation very strongly. I would encourage other people to look at the consultation and consider what they think appropriate, because there's no point having a discussion about how many sciences you should learn at school if we don't even have student teachers who start off with basic science qualifications in maths and other science, which was recommended. My question is, which of course I can't expect anyone on the committee to answer in a comprehensive way, but there is the question of institutional sexism. It's not just a question of, well, one or two people have got bad ideas or we should structure things slightly different. So there is a much deeper question which we need to address. Now, it's partly taken up with that idea of culture, but I think we need to, what practical matters are going to break down institutional sexism?
Okay, thanks very much indeed. So the panel probably can only pick one question each to answer, a couple of minutes each. So we've got questions around culture, but in particular identifying gatekeepers. What do you do about the won't in the middle? You might have political will at the top and the bottom, but you've got a political won't in the middle. Ideal childcare arrangements, and institutional sexism, and how do we promote science in schools? I think were some of them. Okay, should we start again with Leslie?
Oh,
and
for me again.
So
I was going to be last. No, right. A couple of comments to make. First of all, I think when you look at culture and management, I think most of us work in a pyramidal type structure, so that if you can change the culture at the top and then ask them to change the culture underneath, that is helpful. I think you have to look at transparency of things such as promotion and make sure that people understand how you get promotion and the things that you have to do to get that promotion, and make sure that everybody understands that. I think you can start at the top, but I think you're quite right. The middle is important, and we need to get what they think, excuse me, that their influence is also seen, that we understand them, but that we also, if you want, train, leadership training, training in mentoring, training in wanting to support your team with you. I think all those things are important. Childcare, if I'm allowed to just go, childcare, I think I'm very pleased and delighted that finally at King's Buildings, after all these many years, we're finally building a nursery. So I think, I think we can look to see and we can listen to what people want, and we have to listen, and then it's up to convincing the people that hold the purse strings often to say, this is what we need, this is how we need to take it forward. It's not rocket science. Help us do that. And you can do it. It's taken a while, but I'm delighted. I'm sorry some trees have had to come down to make way for the nursery, but I think it is important. And to listen to what else other staff want, and to also accept that some of our staff don't have children, and to look at what they want and what they think are important. But it is very much, I think we all have to listen and then see how best we can take it forward.
Thank you.
So, no, I definitely think there is a real issue in science at the middle management level, where there is a huge proportion of postdoctoral scientists that are stuck within that level. What happens, they'll be on short-term contracts and they will desperately try to publish papers in order to stay within that level, but there's no real promotion and incentive for them to keep going. And no PI can run a group without those staff, and it's important that their skills are highly valued, but there's also some real career structure takes place for them in order to keep them within those middle management roles. The thing that I do see in science in schools is that many of the people that teach science probably have taken science to only with perhaps 2 or 3 years training, and perhaps what exists are scientists who have gone through postdoctoral training and have a bit of experience in labs that actually can go into schools and make the science a bit more exciting and have taken it to a different level. And I think that would be useful to see within schools in order to encourage it. As for what is the ideal childcare, well, rent-a-granny is probably what my colleagues keep asking me to borrow the girl's granny because she works so hard. And that's what we need to see, a bit more of rewarding grandparents, or a little bit of help in some way to encourage them to keep people in jobs as well.
Just a few words on the institutional sexism point, which is an interesting one to come up just as we have hit the 20th anniversary of the Stephen Lawrence murder and the institutional racism identification that came out of that. And it was interesting to note across the spectrum people recognising that there has been a change, that we're not that there isn't a problem solved or anything, and that there are still significant issues around racism manifested in all sorts of ways, but nevertheless there have been changes. And what's driven those changes, I think, has been a cross-the-board determination not to let people get away with things. And that does require sometimes some quite clunky interventions, some quite potentially heavy-handed interventions that can attract quite a lot of adverse comment from certain parts of the press or whatever. But if you stick with them, actually clunky interventions do change attitudes over time, provided you stick with them. So I think that that is actually the way forward. And I have to say also, just in response to Leslie, that I hope that half of the staff of the new childcare facility at King's Building will be men, and that they'll be scientists. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to focus on the childcare question, the STUC's got a very clear position, really, which is that we think childcare has to be centrally funded, state-funded provision, and free at the point of delivery. Now, I understand there's a cost attached to that, but I think that those who campaign against that underestimate the money that would be saved by reducing a lot of flexible working, torturous discussions that go on in local workplaces. It would improve attendance at work, and it would definitely, in my view, from all the research, stem some of this leaky pipeline, which we know is not an efficient use of resources in our economy. So I think that the question of cost isn't being looked at in a rounded way. That is very much our position. That would be delivered in different types of ways. There'll be people who are shift workers who need access to supports around breakfast clubs or after school, and there's issues around shift evening patterns, around particular support for children with disabilities, and a number of the other issues which are tragically under-resourced at the moment in terms of childcare in our country. But childminders, and particularly in rural areas, we've had some very interesting discussions about how to support women remaining in employment in rural parts of Scotland, and the childminding association's doing some good work around that. But the actual service has to be free at the point of the delivery. Otherwise, it's not possible for you to plan your future, really, as a family or as a company, because folk spend hours wondering whether or not to hold on to a place that they've paid for when they haven't got regular income, or do they have to go on a waiting list for 2 years, and etc. It also means the service itself is not sustainable. If it's dependent on being full every day to pay the workers' wages, it won't be full every day. In the real world, a childcare service will not be full every day. After-school clubs across Scotland are closing at the moment because of that very problem, because the particular economic situation has meant that parents have saved a little bit of money by taking their child out of the after-school club. The facility will close. And that is of no benefit at all. It needs to be core funded. So I think that we have to bite the bullet on that, really, and get into a proper discussion with government about how to deliver it from baby age up to 16, never mind 11 to 13-year-olds, 16, 18, whatever age the family requires assistance, there should be some there in an appropriate way.
Thank you, Anne. Can I ask everybody, please, to thank our panel? I think we've had an amazing range of contributions, and we've kept just about to time, so thank you for that as well. We're now going to move to next steps. I think we've been set up very nicely with this discussion to move on to next steps. So could I ask the panel to take their seats, but could I ask also, please, Linda Somerville to take the podium. Linda is manager of the Scottish Resource Centre for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology, who's had lots and lots, I think, of name checks during today. And they are the organisation that is the Scottish Government's principal delivery partner for projects to increase the participation of women in science, technology and engineering. Okay,
Thank you,
Linda,
Fiona.
thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks to the Royal Society of Edinburgh for asking me to close this session today. I think the discussion that we've had has been very vibrant, and it reflects the discussions that Alice and I and others have had up and down the country when we've been out disseminating the report. I was a member of the working group that helped to write the report that the Royal Society has had. And everywhere that we've taken that report, whether it's been into industry or into academia, we've had the same stories from people, often anecdotal about themselves, someone in their families, but we've also had the same themes coming through again and again, and some of those themes I can kind of reflect on slightly, and they have come up today. But I just wanted to cover a few things based on the discussion that we've had. I was asked to talk about our next steps. It would help if I could move this on. I'm Linda Somerville, as Fiona said, from the Scottish Resource Centre for Science, Engineering and Technology, and we are very kindly hosted by Edinburgh Napier University. And the things I wanted to look at are what initiatives we've currently got running and what else our work plan is, what we plan to do to take this work forward. The Royal Society has very kindly increased the profile of this work, but it will go on. How some of the recommendations that we've got and what we can do specifically to carry them forward, and what the challenges are around that, because it's not easy work. If it was easy, we'd have solved it all, 35 years ago, and what some of the opportunities are that we can take from that. So at the Scottish Resource Centre for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology, we aim to do three main things, and that is to improve things, to change things, and to support women as well. And we want to try and increase the participation of women, both in employment and in education in science, engineering and technology, where they are very underrepresented. We've not seen the graphs today other than the very powerful one that Leslie showed, but there are a number of them in your report, and I'm sure you evidence that in your own workplaces or your own areas of research. And we also want to try and change things, and culture has come up laterally in the discussion, and yet, in fact, culture is key to the discussion. It's probably the most significant thing that we need to try and change. And we also try and support women through the recruitment, the retention, the success of women, so that we can reflect on where women have been successful. We do this in a number of ways, and we work with lots of different people. We work with students, we work with employers, with women, and we also work on a policy level around research and policy and try and take forward our work there. So some of the work that we've got planned, we have government funding to do this, we also have industry funding for some of the work that we do, and some of the work that we do is around employers and organisations. And there has been some question marks about the private sector engagement today, and I agree with Maria and the other colleagues here from CELEX that that's one of the more disappointing areas of this work. And there's a context for the work that we do, and some of that context is around when there is slack in the labour market, then things do change. And at the moment, when there was a demand for the set skills that there are, which there are still that demand, but at the moment employers have got different choices that are facing them because of the way the labour market is. And women's employment, women have increased dramatically in terms of their involvement in the labour market in set industries and elsewhere. But we're seeing a decline in that now because of the economic circumstances that we've got. We're seeing that women are beginning to move out of the labour market in both the private sector and the public sector. They're often the first to lose their jobs in those areas. So employers at the moment, you might find that they're actually less likely to engage in this, is our own experience, but that's no reason why we therefore don't think it's critical to them. And it's critical to them for a number of reasons, particularly because of we won't always be in a recession. It might seem like it just now. And when there's a turnaround, they're going to need the skills that we can offer from STEM background. And they're going to need to take these skills and take people forward into roles and into positions to develop their own industries in Scottish economy. So there's something really key that employers are quite short-sighted about at the moment if they don't take this issue quite seriously. And I can maybe return to that. But some of the work that we do is around trying to raise with employers the gender awareness. Sometimes employers will say to me, if only women would apply, then I would employ them. So, well, how do you recruit? Where do you advertise? Have you thought about, using local radio? Have you thought about things that are different to them, things that they haven't thought about their own methods or manner? Or, a woman turns up and there's 5 men on the interview panel. How do they think they want to work there potentially? So there are lots of things that we can advise employers about trying to say to them, you need to look at your own methods that you have just now and say, are they working? And if not, why not? Nobody would set out to be sexist, or certainly not overtly, and they certainly wouldn't admit that these days. But some of the inherent processes that we have within employment are still carrying those things forward. And we try and share good practice. And I think this is where companies like Celex, who are very committed to this agenda, and other larger employers can help as well by trying to pull together your own industry behind you and ask the question from your own colleagues in other parts of your industry, why weren't you there? Isn't this important to you? Can't we do something together? Because there's another bit about capacity within the private sector, that a lot of the SMEs don't have the capacity, or say they don't have the capacity to take this forward. So it's about trying to develop with them and upskill them, I think, from some of the larger employers. And one of the recommendations we made in the report was about taking a sector-wide initiative. And that's why we said that, was to try and bring on that big bit of Scottish enterprise, which is about the SMEs and trying to bring them forward into this debate as well. So sharing good practice across industry. You'll have your own industry forums. There'll be things that you're also involved in across your industry. So trying to share that practice and raise the awareness yourself, I think, is something that you can do. And something that we certainly do by promoting good case studies on this. As I say, we offer policy and reviews to employers. Some of them are quite happy for us to start the initial discussions on that. And then if we point out that they do have some issues, they say, thank you, we'll resolve that ourselves. And they like to go off and do it behind closed doors. And I can understand that. There are some issues there about their own integrity. Nobody wants to be held up as a bad example. But what we look to do is to find the good examples and to share that practice. And another growing area of our work, and this is very much something that we'll take forward following on from the RSC report, is our Athena Swan consultancy. There has been a massive increase in applications for Athena Swan, and I'm glad to see a lot of them have come from Scotland. Previously, there were only 4 universities in Scotland that had Athena Swan status, and that went down to 3. Because the thing about Athena Swan is you don't get it forever. You have to keep showing that there's progress. There has to be some development. So it's not a one-hit wonder. It's not something that you do once. And we offer that along with a number of other things that we offer to employers. Another area that we work in is Interconnect, our project for students. We've talked about the pipeline was mentioned earlier, where women drop out at very key transition points. And one of them, there's a lot of research that shows that women disappear between higher education, where they've made those choices to study subjects, and then into employment, be that into academia or into industry. They drop out at that stage. So we offer some very practical things that we try and do to keep women in at that stage. We did some research before, and it showed that students don't want support. They don't identify themselves as seeing that they need support. What they identify with is that they want links with industry, that they want to meet other students in similar positions. So we run events that bring role models in. So we might bring in women engineers to meet women students that are studying engineering. We ran something recently in Glasgow Caledonian, and these 2 fantastic young women came along from Glasgow who were young women who stereotypically you wouldn't have thought were studying engineering, and they were doing pure mechanical engineering. And they told us that there were the only 2 women out of 70 men on their course. We also met another woman who was a civil engineer, and she was the only first-year civil engineer on her course. So we put her in touch with some other civil engineers. So one of the things that we do with these students is try and get them to support each other by meeting together in that type of environment. We also work significantly with women themselves. And we take the approach that the work we do has to be holistic. It can't just be about working with women, saying if only these women were more confident and if only they had better training, they would move on and develop. We try and work, I say, with a range of stakeholders. But the work we do with women is key, because it's actually about saying to women, we can help you develop your careers, we can give you access to a lot of services that we can provide for free, but we can also try and identify those women that have disappeared, the returners, and try and work with women to try and progress them back. We have a woman just now we've been working with who's been 8 years out of the IT industry. She's got 20 years worth of experience and she can't find her way back in because she's not got that latest bit of technology experience. So, there are lots of women out there that when we're looking at skill shortages in the workforce, they are already trained and they've taken a career break, not always for children, but often, and they now want to go back, and we can try and help them to do that. First of all, by making links, but also by getting them to review their CV, to help them build up some of their own confidence to find their way back. And media training, we're planning to do some media training for women as well, because it's really important that we see more of what Anne talked about, which is a woman engineer. Now, some people think that's just tokenism, and it is to an extent, but it also does change things, because if you can more identify when there's a big PFI project, for example, and it's engineers that are doing it, and it suddenly comes under the spotlight, and the person that's there to talk about it is a man project manager, then that just reinforces the type of people that work in these environments. So we want to get women confident to talk about their own research or their own projects that they're involved in out in the media so that they become the face of that industry as well. Some of the recommendations, looking back on the report, that we'll look to take forward in the next year or so, I think are specific to SET, but they are wider. As we've said already, this is about occupational segregation. The RSC asked if I would do a presentation about the report to the Standard Life. Now, they're in the finance sector, but they had picked up Tapping All Our Talents, and they had realised that much of what is in that actually applies to women in their own organisation. Long working hours, culture, women are in the minority and senior positions. So a lot of this does spread across different industries. And I think it's the scope of occupational segregation that's of interest, because there's no silver bullet for this. That's why it does have to be cross-divisional across government that looks at this as well. We talked earlier about culture and whether that starts at home, with the advice people have at home, and also what roles they see around them. The research that we've done as well early on in some of our projects around students, and also about women moving into construction, showed that most women that go into construction choose a construction apprenticeship because either their father or their uncle already does that type of work. So there is thinking there about exposure and how you get people exposed to other things. There are also issues to do with what happens within school, and all too often teachers get a lot of blame for saying they didn't tell people about types of work, or careers advisors didn't do a job. The reality is just now many of our school students don't see careers advisors because there isn't enough careers advisors around. But there are issues there to do with what happens in schools and how these types of subjects are engaged with amongst schools. And then I've talked a little bit about what we can do to support women both in further and higher education, and to make that link. These are key transition points in women's lives, and you find that women drop out at all of these key transition points when we look at what's unfortunately called the leaky pipeline. And workplace culture. Workplace culture is something that's enormous, and it's not just about direct, overt things within the workplace. Again, whether that's to do with bullying or sexism, a lot of it is very subtle. A lot of it's to do with people who are excluded from things within a workplace without even realising it, just because there are networks and there are organisations and there are things going on in a workplace that are established routines and practices that nobody thought to question. And what is the policy within workplaces? Policies are often good. People will say, well, we have a policy of part-time working here, but nobody actually does it. So it's about making that a practice, You know, people will say, well, you're allowed to work flexibly here, but I've never asked because nobody actually does. So it's about taking these things that are policies and turning them into a reality in the workplace. And there's often resistance to that. Change can bring resistance. You know, in some institutions, they say, well, if somebody wants to work flexibly, they have to apply to work flexibly. So therefore, the default is to not work flexibly. Why don't you change that around as an employer and think more creatively about it and say everybody works flexibly? And that way, if people still want to come in 9 to 5 every day, they can still do that. That will be their flexible hours. And that way, you're not having to single yourself out to put your hand up and say, I want to be the person to apply for flexible working. And you have to fill in a form and get it approved. So there are ways to actually change the culture within your organisation that it becomes a norm to do certain things. And I think that's specifically important in the work that we try and do to take this forward. Some of the recommendations that we made in the report were for a variety of organisations, and the reason that they were for a variety of organisations is because, as we've talked about this morning, this affects lots of people, and we all have our part to play in that. We all have a role that we can play in that. Business and industry is something I think that is really significant to do to take this forward, and they are the people that maybe aren't in the room today, but we'll know some of them. You'll all know people in those fields, so it's up to us to go back and speak to them about it and say, why this is important to them and what they should be trying to do about it. The government has been here today, and it was great to see the Minister along to give their response and look at what they are trying to do to take this forward. And there's other organisations as well, whether it's the Funding Council or our own universities and research institutions, that we can take this work forward. There are some specific recommendations that I know that through our own organisation we'll try and look at. And that is to take forward the strategies to achieve Silver Athena Swans. And I know at the moment the Funding Council have said they want people to look at bronze, but we want to do better than that. So we will continue to try and push for that to happen amongst organisations. Also with employers, there's a key here about part-time working, and it did come up earlier. Part-time working isn't just about getting a full-time job and splitting it in half. It's about actually saying what tasks need done within an organisation, and can we do some of them on a part-time basis. And that's again about employers thinking more creatively about how they create work and how they do that. Part-time working is essentially something that is predominantly done by women, but often is sought after by men, and men would quite like to work part-time as well. And the reason that they don't is really economic reasons, because a Joseph Rowntree Foundation study showed recently that when they did a spot check on all the part-time working that was available and advertised across the UK at that particular time, there was only 7% of jobs that were advertised that were part-time jobs that were advertised on a full-time equivalent of over £20,000. So there's no quality part-time working out there. And we meet women all the time through the work that we do, where women say to us, well, I work part-time and I've just stayed doing this because they let me come back from maternity leave part-time, and I've just not progressed since then. Because they never see a part-time job advertised in their own organisation. You've got to be in the job and then negotiate your hours down normally. So they can't progress. So quality part-time working is something that employers within the sector need to take seriously, both in academia and industry, if they want to change the culture. And also to address the retention issues, because women won't come back from career breaks or will choose to leave if they can't get those hours. And I think the thing about retention as well is it makes economic sense for the employers. PricewaterhouseCoopers announced that it takes an employer about a year's salary to actually get a member of staff back up to a competent level between their costs that they've got to put into recruitment and training and the gap that there is when that person's left. So it makes economic sense for them to hold on to people when they are trained. And that's something that we'll try and take forward with employers as well. And as far as the Scottish Government, we will continue to work with them. We're funded and supported by them, but we'll also try and press for them to look at the things that are the recommendations. I've been asked to take part in their Occupational Segregation Working Group, and I'll try and make sure, and I will make sure, that the recommendations from Tapping All Our Talents and from the recommendations that came out of the Women's Employment Summit are looked at actively across all government departments. Affordable childcare, that's come up earlier. The RSC didn't go quite as far as to say free childcare, but we said affordable. And even affordable would be a start along a progression towards potentially free childcare in Scotland. So there are challenges to these types of work that we do, and the challenges are around, we have short-term funding, and it's hopefully continuing, but it is tends to be short-term. I'm not talking about my own organisation, but other organisations that take up this work, they do it on a project basis. They do it as an initiative. They do it as something that's slight. And there are benefits to the individual, but they're really hard to evaluate. How can I prove to you that the intervention we did with a woman today actually made an effect on her career in 5 years' time or 6 months' time? A lot of the work is actually quite subtle and it's hard to evaluate. And all too often people want to see what they get for their money. They say, well, tell me, show me the number of people that improved in this area. And they want to see the figures around that. And also the work, a lot of the work is a deficit model work, where it's about saying, as I said earlier, it's about the woman, it's about saying she didn't get that right, and if only she was better trained or more competent, she would have done better. We need to ensure that it's a wider range than just that. The employer's participation, as we said, is limited, but out of that, really what I think the difficulty with a lot of the initiatives is that the structural barriers still remain. And unless we can address those structural barriers in institutions around employment and education, then we won't resolve this agenda, despite the fact that there is goodwill and good work going on in lots of different places. And the structural barriers result in a number of things. They result in women's lack of participation in the labour movement in these areas, but also in another factor that's coming more and more strongly, which is about women's underemployment. And we heard about that earlier by somebody saying, well, I took a job as a technician and I just stayed at that level. That's something that's becoming more and more prevalent, where you meet women that are hugely qualified and skilled and experienced, but doing jobs working at below their level of skill and qualification. And there's a cost to that to the economy, and it's a massive cost. In Scotland, we reckon it's about £120 million per annum, at least. So that's something else that I think that needs to be looked at, and we will continue to try and take that forward, because it's a challenge. But out of those challenges, there's opportunities for change, and there's ways that we can look to take our own work forward. And I'd ask everybody who's here today to think about what they can do, because we can't solve this as an organisation on its own. The RSC have done a great job by trying to increase the profile of this. But there are some areas that we can take this forward by saying, what kind of responses do we need to these challenges, and how can we do that in our own organisations? Some examples are, and I would say if this is about mainstreaming, but I agree with Jocelyn, we don't want mainstreaming to mean it doesn't happen. Somebody's still got to drive it. Is if you look at one of the other things the Funding Council has done, is they've actually put the introduction of recruitment and retention targets for female STEM students into their widening participation work. So that's about making what was a priority for us something that's now a strategy and a mainstreaming strategy for them. Skills Development Scotland have done it as well, where they've actually put gender in the action on gender imbalance into their ICT plan, so that they want to make sure that as that industry in Scotland, which is another crucial industry for Scotland, as it develops, gender is actually looked at within that. And maybe we need to think a bit more about a collective response, and I'm glad that Anne Henderson was here today and Douglas from Prospects along as well, because if what we're saying is gender discrimination in recruitment and retention of women at work is actually happening, and I think in some places we are saying that is what's happening, then that is an industrial relations issue and therefore needs a collective response. So as often women suffer quietly and individually and say, well, I know about that promotion because it wasn't advertised, nobody told me, I didn't think about this, and they think it's to do with them, when in fact it's actually an industrial relations issue, and sometimes needs that collective response, both from them, their unions and their employers. And the last thing I just wanted to reflect on was about increased participation, because increased partnership. And I think that I want to thank the Royal Society of Edinburgh for the work they've done here, because they have very much taken this much higher up lots of people's agendas. But it's up to us now how to respond to that. The Scottish Government, as well as the work they do with us, has launched a new project called Career Wise. And I want to thank Ian Wall from STEMIC as well for their recommendation that they put forward that's made this happen. And that will deliver changes as well in this area over the next few years. We are also planning, we've applied for a grant from the Big Lottery, and I'm hopeful that we'll hear positively about that soon, to work with SEMTA, who's the Skills Sector Council, specifically to try and address the issue about private sector engagement and how we can work with them in partnership to get the private sector involved in this. Because we can't do this on our own, we're a tiny little team of people, so mostly part-time. So how do we get lots of people involved round about us? And it's about sharing the agenda and sharing what is actually the objective for this, is to increase women's participation. And I'm sure in your own area, because you'll fit into one of these categories probably, you can think of ways that you can do that. And I'd ask you to do that and make sure that you play an active part. Thank you.
Linda, thank you so much. That was excellent. It just falls to me just to say a very few words, because I know I'm standing between you and your lunch. So, first of all, can I extend my thanks and your thanks to Jocelyn in her absence? We'll be passing them on. To the speakers too for the first-class contributions, offering a different range of experiences and indeed ideas about how to take things forward. To you, the audience, for your stimulating questions, a lot of which we'll be taking up in different ways. To Linda for that last presentation, which I'm sure you'll agree really gives us a real idea about how we might take this forward, and also to Fiona for our first-class chairing. Thank you, Fiona. The Royal Society itself will be continuing to do a lot of things, holding events as we always do, pick up leaflets on the things that we're involved in. And Sally Brown, who is the convener of our Education Committee, spoke earlier. And again, the Education Committee is taking up some of these issues that came up through the Curriculum for Excellence and so on. And also we're holding events with the David Hume Institute, looking at the whole route from schools through further education to higher education, and looking at the higher education more generally. So all of these issues, in one way or another, will be progressed in the work of this organisation too. As was said earlier, there'll be organisations, different groups within the Scottish Government taking things forward, and Linda and Anne will be involved in some of these. But I think it just falls to you now as the audience to have your lunch, to network, to think about some of these challenges, and also to think about how you can be champions of change, wearing your capes, of course, as superheroes. So off enjoy your lunch. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your contributions. I hope you've enjoyed it, but I hope it will just be the beginning of an ongoing relationship. So we'll see you again. Thank you. Lunch is upstairs.